People who have seen something they could never explain. What was the thing? A tree fell in front of us while we were driving. It almost killed us. Moments later, a group of men dressed in nice clothes just happened to have chainsaws in their car. That was black and black-tinted windows. They started cutting up the tree. We quickly turned around and said nope. I tried to tell myself that it was just Mormons, who happened to have chainsaws in the back of their car. I called my mom the other day to see if she still remembers that incident, and she does. Having grown up very rural, I've definitely heard of stories like, well, we were on the way to the funeral when the tree falls across the road. Luckily, we had the chainsaws from last night. Glad to hear Heffery is doing okay. Short version 14 years old. Pretending to sleep at a friend's house and instead walking around the city, Colorado Springs, Colorado at around 3 a.m. and suddenly for about 2 to 3 minutes it's bright as day across the whole city. I could clearly see mountains probably 5 miles away. And then poof, back to dark. There was no obvious source of the light. That was around 35 years ago. Still have no clue what it was. Edit. Surprised this post got any attention. Also amazed at how many others had very similar experiences. Agree with the feedback suggesting a meteorite is the most likely explanation. It was not a cloudy night, so I think electrical ground source bouncing off clouds is less likely. Those suggesting iridium satellites, this was mid to late 80s, so I don't think they launched yet. And yeah, there's a ton of military stuff in the area. NORAD, the Air Force Academy, Peterson AFB, and I think a few others were mentioned. I think these are less likely than a meteorite because of how far up and down the mountain range I could see. Also, folks mentioning a meteorite probably wouldn't last 2 to 3 minutes. I think my time perception could be off. I froze up and just stared at the basin for of the city and the very prominent mountains for however long it was. It felt like a few minutes, but maybe it wasn't. The odd thing with any explanation is that the light source was clearly on my side of the Rocky Mountains. The whole Front Range was visible. So the source seems like it had to be from above. Yet I couldn't see any point of light in the sky where intuition says it had to be. Still, I suppose they have been nestled behind some geography that blocked my view but didn't block it casting light on the basin of the city mountain range. That seems plausible. Meteorite burning up in the atmosphere most likely. Saw a video recently of this happening in India, went from pitch black to nearly daylight. I fly helicopters for a living. I was working on a power line one year and was going back to our landing zone and noticed an opening in the trees, what appeared to be a leg. I came back and tried to get as low as I could into the clearing, thinking it was a person. It was a full-grown cow that had been completely skinned. There were no farms around and the animal didn't appear to be cut up in any way. I went back to the landing zone, picked up one of my ground crew members and flew back with him just so he could verify that I wasn't crazy. The flight back, we were both kind of in awe because we have no idea how that animal got to where it's at. Even more so that it had no skin on its entire body. It looked like a perfect cow sand skin. A voice sounding like my friend's sister calling out his name from a tree line in a park. Me and friend were walking home near the middle of the night. Both of us heard it. He was called out 3 times. Crazy how you always hear these stories. I heard my wife calling me from the basement, but she was out of town, or similar. The story always ends with, I was super freaked out so I ran. We never hear the perspective of somebody who approached the voice. Those who approach the voice do not live to tell. I was standing on the seaside walkway with a bunch of other people watching the sunset. A red orb came speeding down the coastline at like 50 to 150 meters altitude. Didn't think much of it until it instantly stopped and speeded back the way it came until it was out of sight. No noise, too low for a plane or helicopter, and wasn't a flare because it was flying fast. Stopped instantly and then flew back the way it came. Several people saw it, but this was before mobile phones with cameras were a mainstream thing. Was talking on the phone to my dad in the garden, about 15 years ago. Saw an orange light slowly come up over some trees behind my house, then take off straight up at a ridiculous speed. Stood there in silence, and so did he. Explained to him what I'd just seen, and he said he'd just seen the exact same thing. He was over 100 miles away in Manchester at the time. I live outside city limits. There are very few houses near my home and many tall bushes and trees around the house. There is a small mountain at some distance. The nights are very quiet and there is no street lights, so after dark the only lights are the lights from my house and the moon light. There are two trees a little far from my house that are standing close to one another. One night while I was outside my house with a flashlight doing something, I realized there was only one of those trees. I looked around that tree with my flashlight, but there was no sign of the other tree, like it never existed. The next day I went there during daytime to see exactly what happened to the other tree, and they both were there just like I remembered. I looked around them and even climbed on them to see anything strange, but nothing was out of ordinary. Sorry about this bug in your simulation. We usually patch servers during the nighttime. For more details, watch The Truman Show. This could have been an ocular migraine. I had one once that caused everything to the right of my center vision to be entirely faked by my brain. As if my right eye had entirely turned off and everything it should have been seeing was just CGI faked in, and there was no way to tell other than some discrepancies. I went to cross a road, looked left, clear, looked right, clear, and stepped out into the road. Except when looking right, my brain knew what the road looked like, so gave me an entirely fake image of that road with no cars in it, when there were actually several cars coming that nearly ran me over. I had to turn around to face the other way so the road was on my left to actually see what was on the road. On the same walk, there was a lamp post by the path. If I looked very slightly to the left of the lamp post, the entire thing disappeared as if it were entirely invisible, whilst everything looked entirely normal. One night, years after high school and I'd gotten married, I had a vivid and very sad dream about the first boyfriend I ever really loved. We were 15 and 16, broke up about 3 years later because he really got into drugs. I had this dream maybe 9 years after that. I dreamed I was walking down a crowded sidewalk in some big city and I bumped into him going the direction I just came from. He was crying and he asked me for help. I can't remember if the dream changed then or I woke up, but it was just that little snippet of seeing his face. It was so clear. I still remember how his beautiful blue eyes looked. I don't know why I waited a couple more years to call his mother and ask about him one day when I recalled that dream for some reason. But I did call her. It turns out he had died in a freak accident around the time I had that dream. He had a car in his garage that he was working on. He had climbed on the hood for some reason, to do something, and he fell. Broke his neck and it was fatal. Now I'm always sad and a little creeped out every time I think of that dream. Probably always will be. 2 missing hours. I posted about it on another account. Setup. I used to be a home health aide for the disabled, elderly. I stayed overnights to help them get up, use the restroom, change, clean them, etc. I used to take care of a man named Mr. M. We kept an old large clock alarm that chimed every hour. Every 2 hours we'd roll Mr. M over, and change his pads. We recorded everything that happened in a notebook by the clock. Story. It was a usual day until around 2 o'clock am. I heard the chimes ring, twice, wrote down that I was going in, then went in, wrote what I did, changed his pads, wrote the time I got done, then went back to the kitchen where I sat every night, having my laptop set up to pass the time. About 15 minutes pass, and I hear the clock chime again. 4 times. I look at my computer, thinking the clock was wrong, and no. 4 o'clock am. I look at the notes, no new notes. I write that I'm going in. I go in to change Mr. M's pads. I walk in, and he looks at me and asks, "Weren't you just in here?" I said yay, then went with changing his pads. They were dry, a rarity. I still have no idea what happened to those 2 hours. It was like 2 hours passed in 15 minutes. And 3 o'clock was skipped completely. I was watching a YouTube series at the time, and my video would have ended in that 2 hours. I have no idea to this day what the hell happened. To those suggesting a time change, DST, this happened December 11, 2016. As a kid on rainy days, I would grab my umbrella and jacket and play around in the rain, collecting raindrops. When I was about 11, I was playing outside in my front yard one day. I decided to go into the sidewalk to catch a bit more rain. I then looked into the street. It was a foggy rainy day, but I could have sworn I saw someone who looked exactly like me. Me being a kid, I panicked, ran inside for the rest of the rain. But I was still an idiot, so I never really told anyone, 'cause I thought that they wouldn't believe me. Edit. Holy guacamole. Didn't know others had the same experience as me. Also, to clarify more, they didn't copy my movements like a mirror. Yes, we were both standing and the same height, but when I was running and turned around for a moment, they didn't really seem to move. They just stood there staring. I worked as an under-butler in a large Scottish castle in the early 2000s. One night, I was the only person in the house, and decided to throw a load of laundry in before bed. I walked down to service hallway, into the ironing room, and from there to the washing machine room. I got my laundry in, and then started to leave. I turned the lights off in the washing machine room, and suddenly everything was black. The lights weren't on in the ironing room. My first thought was, it's weird that I didn't turn the lights on in here when I came in. But they aren't on, so obviously I didn't. The ironing room had huge ironing tables the size of snooker tables, and as I started to walk through, I kept bumping into them. After a couple of times of bumping into them, I was suddenly filled with a terrible, accompanied, watched, spine-tingling feeling that something was there and not to look toward the sewing room, another room that came off the ironing room. I fumbled my way through the ironing room, back to the service hall in a panic. The hall lights were on and everything was fine. That is the whole story. I didn't see anything. However, there are some problems. To this day, I am confident that I turned the lights on in the ironing room when I went in. It wasn't possible to move through the room without bumping into things a bunch of times, as my exit demonstrated. The light in the ironing room was controlled by a very large switch that made a loud clicking noise. I didn't hear it click off when I was in the washing room. In the days that followed, the family and the butler returned home, and I had forgotten about the entire incident. A week or so later, I suddenly remembered it happening, and said to the butler, "I've never heard of any ghost stories at the castle. Are there any?" He kind of dismissively said, "Oh, they say there is a white lady in the ballroom, and, room name redacted, is apparently haunted, but that's it. Oh, and they say the sewing room is haunted." I kind of gasped and told the butler the story. He seemed fascinated. He told the family, and a couple of them agreed that the laundry room was unsettling. I don't believe in ghosts, and think it was likely an unfortunately timed electrical fault and an overactive imagination. Still, awe. Never forget how sudden and strong the feeling of a presence was when I was fumbling my way out of the ironing room. There's no feeling quite like the fear you feel when you think something is there. Like they say, you're not afraid of being alone in the dark. You're afraid of not being alone in the dark. Not seen but heard. I swear I keep hearing breathing in my fucking room in the middle of the night. Edit. Thanks for the upvotes. I only hear it every couple of months or so, haha. IDK, I think my room's haunted, or maybe I am going insane. Guarantee it's you. Record on your phone. Reveal the mystery of you being half asleep, terrified of your own breathing. There is probably a large lizard or snake in your room then. Ah yes, a much more comforting thought than a ghost or demon spooking you awake. You're just laying there and a giant snake Kool-Aid mans its way through the ceiling, into your bed, with you. It may be hypnagogic hallucinations. They can also happen when you are awake, feel awake, but tired. I often hear breathing, people mumbling, old school music, and church bells. I had a really similar experience once. It was back in my family house while visiting. I was about to go to sleep, and while looking at my phone I heard it breathing from my slightly opened window. Slow ins and outs. I kept lying in my bed listening to it for about 5 minutes, thinking about what the fuck is happening. If I remember correctly, I had my blinds shut, so looking directly was not an option, and idea of opening them terrified me. I finally managed to convince myself, and there is nothing. But the sound keeps on coming. It was dark, so I couldn't see a lot, but I had the feeling that the source of breath is beneath the window, outside of my field of view. So I decided to go outside. I took some kind of budget mace found in kitchen and big survival torch. As soon as I opened the doors I heard it. It was dogs barking really from far away. I quickly recognized the pattern and went back inside. Yep. It was these fuckers' barks that scared the shit out of me. I don't know why it sounded slightly different inside and why these motherfuckers were barking rhythmically non-stop for around 15 minutes. Maybe they were just barking at whatever was under your window. Fuck you lol. That's fucking terrifying. I would strongly suggest to get carbon monoxide checked in your room. High amounts of carbon monoxide might trigger hallucination, make you hear or see things, especially that you say that you are fully awake and hear stuff. You can't see or smell it, but high volumes of it might permanently hurt or kill you. I was walking along a park sidewalk blowing off grass clippings. Got under some pine trees and through a break in the canopy an 8 to 10 pound rock came tumbling out of the sky, bounced and chipped the sidewalk and rolled down into a creek. Weirdest thing I've ever seen. I, 13 at the time, was about to go to bed. I was brushing my teeth in front of my bedroom window. staring into the dark, when I suddenly heard someone screaming outside. I stopped brushing so I could hear it better. Someone was screaming out my name. I sort of froze and kept listening. More voices joined, all screaming my name and laughing loudly. It was kind of like an audience at a sports game. It went on for about 5 minutes. When it stopped, I, in shock, went downstairs to my parents to ask them if they'd heard anything. It was impossible not to hear as it was very loud. They had not heard anything. I assume it was some sort of a hallucination. Still feel weird when I'm alone in my room late at night. That's just angels cheering you on through a particularly exciting toothbrushing session. It was 9 out of 10 dentists. The 10th one decided to stay in the car because he didn't agree that it was a good method of encouraging dental hygiene in the youth. Hypnagogic hallucination. Mine are always auditory like this, and sometimes they happen when I'm really tired. In my early 20s I was home alone. I woke up to my cell phone ringing but missed the call. The number I missed the call from was my landline home phone number. I got up and found the cordless phone on the kitchen counter. I looked everywhere, but no one was in the house and the doors were all locked. The call was coming from inside the house. Jokes aside, sometimes autodialers can get lucky and randomize a number you have saved. My nephew was pointing at a picture on the wall saying, "Boo," and laughing. Then the picture fell onto the desk below it. Shortly after my mother passed away, I was going through and organizing her belongings in her room. I was talking out loud as if I were talking to her. There were some boxes with family photo albums I'd been looking for that I hadn't been able to find, and it was really worrying me. I was sitting on the floor and said aloud, "Where did you leave those albums, Mom?" Very slowly, her closet door opened on its own. A slow, creaking movement from nearly totally closed to halfway open. I was as terrified as I'd ever been in my life. I froze and didn't move. But I looked at exactly eye level and there was a cardboard box labeled, "Albums," in my mother's handwriting on the lower shelf of the closet. I am not a religious or even spiritual person, and I thought that there might be some imbalance in the hanging of the closet door. I went back to the door many times and tested it by wiggling it back and forth and leaving it in different positions, but it's never moved that way since. When I was at university in my second year, we lived in a terraced house. I have a history of vivid, lucid dreams, and had just recently at this time experienced a couple episodes of sleep paralysis. One night I wake up, I think, anyway. And I remember staring at the doorway completely frozen and seeing the shadows of 2 men there. They were whispering about taking me and discussing whether I was asleep. I remember hearing "Shish, go back to sleep." It was completely fuzzy and dark, and I was in that very much blurred reality stage of not being able to tell if I was awake properly or not. I couldn't move at all, and chalked it up to sleep paralysis and went back to sleep. I wouldn't have thought twice about it except the police knocked on our door that afternoon. I wasn't in. My housemates told me, and said our neighbor had had their house broken into that same night. The real kicker is that at the time our front door lock was broken, anyone could have come in and left without us knowing. To this day I will truly never know if it was a coincidentally bad day to have a nightmare, or a lucky escape. Woman shrugging, ETA I'm pretty sure it was a dream. If there hadn't been the burglary the same night I wouldn't have thought twice about it. The only other thing I wondered at the time was our housemate had a habit of not closing the broken front door properly. So 2 to 3 times a week at that time, if you got up in the middle of the night, the front door would be swinging wide open. Trust me, we were very annoyed at him for this, ha ha ha. I wondered if the people who had broken in next door had happened to see our door open and figured they'd have a look and decided there was nothing in our ratty student house worth taking, and that some part of this had combined with my weird dream state to mix up some dream and some reality. It is also worth saying that I am an exceptionally light sleeper and woke up constantly in the night at this time in my life. Overall, I still think that dream is the most likely scenario. But truth is I will never know for sure. And I figure the end result is the same either way ultimately. Super interesting hearing other stories of similar experiences too. Actually, I still don't understand the concept of déjà vu. It happens to me about twice a year since I was around 18 years old. I'm 44, just random places or experiences that I swear I have seen and been through before. It's so strange. It's likely more complicated than this, but I've heard it explained theorized that your brain can store memories as short-term or long-term memories. Usually as short-term memories that later get moved to long-term memories. In déjà vu, Your brain is accidentally storing them as long-term memories while you're experiencing them, making it feel like you're remembering it at the same time that you're experiencing them. Your brain is accidentally autoplaying your memory as it's recording it. This incident happened to me when I was 10 years old. My friend and I were cycling. It was around 7:15, and it had gotten dark. There was a road where we usually cycled, but it was a dead end. There were bushes on one side and a wall with barbed wires. At the end of the road, there was a residential complex on the right side, and a small route led to the farms. The middle part of the road was all quiet and dark. My friend and I were just chatting and cycling when I heard a sound. I don't remember it well, but it seemed like a little girl weeping. Just as I was about to ask my friend, "Hey, did you hear that?" he shouted, "Run!" Ah! When we reached the other side of the road where the residential complex was, I asked him, "What the heck, bro? What happened?" He was shivering in fear and said he saw a woman in the bushes with a big white eye. When some people appeared on the road, we quickly left. We were shivering with fear, and to this day, we don't know how to explain it. How Romain Grosjean went through the barriers at Bahrain and came out alive. Edit link for those who haven't seen it. Link. I got sleep paralysis and then I was pulled off my bed. I was home alone. I couldn't move but I could see, and I didn't see anything. I don't go into that room anymore. Not me, but my dad. When I was younger, my biological mom and her husband kidnapped me and took off to another state. My dad said that he was finally starting to accept that he may never see me again after nearly a year of searching. And then one day when he was on a walk, this little girl came up to him and asked, "Are you looking for a little girl?" He looked at her, confused, and she just turned around and pointed up the block at a group of kids playing, and said, "She's right there." He walked closer, past the girl, to try to get a better look and saw me in the group. He turned around to figure out what the little girl's deal was, and she was just gone, without a trace. Turns out my biomom and her husband had come back to visit family for whatever reason. I used to call BS because the story is just so insane, but throughout the years, it's the one story of my dad's that never changed. Not one detail. He's told it so many times that I can recite it word for word, and he's always so fucking awestruck when he tells it. Like I can almost see him racking his brain, searching for the most logical explanation. I was approximately 2 to 3 when it happened, and I'm now 26. He still can't piece it all together to this day. Me and my brother saw light coming through a bricked-off vent in my house about 20 years ago. It was a powerful light, like there was a mini-sun in there. Light has never come through it before or since, and we both still remember it. I once saw my neighbors bringing grocery in their house, but they still ask us for stuff. A drive that usually takes me less than 3 hours took me more than 4 once. I don't know how it happened. No traffic, didn't take the wrong path, didn't see anything strange in the road, same speed as usual. Everything was normal until I noticed it was starting to get dark, then checked the clock and freaked out. I don't know how to put this, but there was a period of time when I would get home from work late at night. During this time, I'd get out of my vehicle and head towards the front door, obviously. But without fail, nearly every night, I would look up at the stars without really knowing why. I would look at the moon for a long while with no thoughts in my head. Eventually I noticed a bright white light, every night, at the same spot in the sky. A bright star? Probably. A distant planet? Could be. So during my little stargazing routine, I'd look for that bright star. One night it was gone. And ever since then I stopped feeling entranced by the night sky. Sometimes I miss that light in the sky, but most the time I don't think of it. Never did find out what it may have been. Could have witnessed the death of a star. They get really bright before they disappear. That is fascinating, rip to a real one. I was staying the night with a cousin on his ranch, and in his front yard there was a basketball hoop on a homemade wall like concrete bricks stacked upwards, and we both to this day swear on God we saw what looked like a 8-foot-tall coyote standing up against the wall tugging on the hoop. We closed the blinds quick, and that was the night we established the existence of the ranch's very own cryptid. I think we called it like, Doomdog, or some shit. We were 9 to 10.